Hi, I'm Dave Liss, a DC-based consultant and journalist, your host for this series of podcasts, Wellness Musketeers, where we will be discussing a wide range of topics in the fields of health, wellness, and physical fitness, with maybe a little bit of management thrown in as well. Our three experts are co-conspirators, as they like to call themselves, are Dr. Richard Kennedy, Mike James, aka Aussie Mike, and Ketil Hviding. Each bring over 30 years of international experience in the health, fitness, and wellness fields. In our first podcast, Richard Kennedy discusses COVID-19, the importance of vaccines, and why some people are hesitant to take them. Aussie Mike outlines the effect COVID-19 has had on the fitness industry with the trend towards home fitness and the effect this could have on our future health and wellness. Ketil will discuss the impact of all these global considerations and trends for people all over the world. Welcome, Dr. Kennedy, Aussie Mike, and Ketil. Let's start by asking you each to describe a little bit about your background, how you all came to meet each other, and what you've been up to during these COVID times. Mike, why don't you begin?
Okay, well, thank you very much, Dave. I came over here in 1993 to the USA from a good career in Australia, managing the largest corporate fitness program there. And I was recruited by the World Bank, subsequently took the position for a 2-year contract, and I'm here 28 years later. So a lot's happened in that time. Some of the good things have happened. I've met these two fine individuals, Ketil and Dr. Kennedy. Ketil, I met relatively recently, in about 2014. He came to my boxing class, and what better way to bond than to try and punch each other in the face, I say. It's a great way to bond, of course. Of course, I'm only joking. Dr. Kennedy, on the other hand, I've known since 1994. We started as two young, fresh-faced newbies working for the World Bank Health Services Department. And over the years, we've collaborated on a number of outreaches programs, including the Health Feedback Seminars, Healthy Heart Month, blood pressure awareness, diabetes awareness, etc. But where our relationship was very unique, I think, is that in managing a fitness centre and a program with over 4,000 members and 140 different nationalities, let's just say you face issues that are not covered in management books or seminars. So Richard was a great resource for me personally and for the program, as he could provide great obvious medical knowledge on issues that could arise. And there's been things before COVID. There was the Asian flus, there was flu epidemics, there was the SARS issue, all of those type of things. But also with his international experience, and we could discuss things and how to perhaps tackle issues which may require some cultural sensitivity. So he's a great resource and became a great friend of mine as well. Since I retired in 2017, I commenced working with the Parkinson's community, teaching boxing classes at the Virginian Physical Therapy Clinic. Unfortunately, COVID-19 brought that to a bit of a halt. Hopefully, we'll be able to get that started up again as we emerge from COVID. Also, with the lockdown, if you'd like to call it that, where we're all a little bit cloistered, I undertook a course with the Well Coaches organisation and became a nationally certified wellness coach. So that's what I've been up to, other than driving my wife crazy. That's been how I've been spending my time. Let's hear from Dr. K and what he's been up to.
Well, thank you, Mike. I'm glad to be here today. I'm an internist by training. I worked at the World Bank from 1994 to 2014. And from that time, I embarked on trying to retire fully. But then I started to get into the mindset of fix it here, fix it there at the house. And my wife said, you need to find something else to do. So basically, I went back and started seeing patients again, which has always been my passion. During my training and my life at the bank, in addition to meeting Mike and things like that, I got to work with many of the IMF staff as well, and particularly during the annual meetings abroad. And since then, once I've left, I've been more involved with primary care at MedStar in Washington, D.C. And while that's been going on since this COVID pandemic has hit the planet, I've been giving seminars and talks to different groups, but I've also been as a representative of MedStar to talk to a local audience at NBC as well as Fox News on a couple of times during the pandemic, and trying to get people to look into and understand in a simple way what's happening with COVID, because there's been a lot of misinformation put out there. And from that has come a lot of debate about vaccines, which we'll talk about momentarily. I'll stop right here and turn it over to Ketil right now.
Hi, Mike Oller gave me an introduction there about the boxing program. So I can pretty much say that I've been trying to keep my head protected against his punches and dodge the COVID punches. Now, I have been working at the fund for 24 years as an economist, and most recently in the IMF Secretary's Department, helping the board with its role in surveillance and financial aid to countries in need. But also more and more, when I worked at the fund, more and more I saw the importance of health, wellness, and fitness, and I became very engaged in the fitness center. And that took me on to a much broader role, and seeing that we really didn't take fitness and wellness sufficiently seriously at the fund, and I think the World Bank is probably something similar, as well as most other big organizations, at least in this country. And during the pandemic, all of these came to come into a climax, so to speak. So it became really, really critical. And in that period, I was very happy to work with Dave on developing health and wellness programs online, focusing on issues like food and mental health, loneliness, meditation, and walking. I think we were quite successful, and this podcast is in a way a continuation of the same thing. And of course, as a manager at the fund, I've also been dealing with the new brave world of working from home, which has its advantages, but also its downsides. And I'm trying to clean up my boxing style, and I think I can soon when we get into the ring again, I can get a good shot at Mike.
Well, it's great to see that you all have been keeping busy during these most unusual times. Let's start with the obvious cause of these unusual times. Dr. Kennedy, can you give us your thoughts about where we stand right now with COVID and what our pathway to the future looks like, especially now with the new emerging, I'm going to mispronounce it, Omicron variant?
Yes, Dave, and actually you pronounced it correct, which is pretty good with all of the new names that are coming out. Where are we now? Well, this is an ever-changing, and you'll probably hear me say this a lot, ever-evolving pandemic. It continues to be an issue, partly because of the quickness and the infectivity and the contagiousness of the COVID virus. And as this Omicron variant has shown us, we now have, this is the 6th variant we've had since they first identified this back in February of 2020. And it continues to evolve. Right now, we're seeing about, in this country for sure, about 100,000 cases a day, and about, a little over 1,100 deaths per day, which is still way too much for where we are now. That being said, it would be much more if we didn't have vaccinations. And what's happening globally is that we need to get more of the vaccines out to the developing world that is having trouble accessing and getting these vaccines. As the Omicron variant has shown us, it's come out of another part of Southern Africa, and it's already spread to much of Europe. It's already in about 13 countries. It's in 17 states in the United States as of earlier today, and will continue to spread. The good part is going forward, as we get more and more of the global population vaccinated, there tends to be less hosts for the organism to take up residence and cause infection. And that's where the goal should continue to be, is getting as many people vaccinated as possible. The G7 countries have stepped in and provided vaccines for those countries that are having more difficult time getting the resources put in. And so we'll see where we go from there. I think right now, going forward, COVID-22 will be with us through much of 2022. And if it looks like the Omicron is not as deadly so far, but the jury is still out, it's still early to tell, but it appears it's not as aggressive an organism as the Delta variant has been.
Dr. K, when we're talking about vaccines, what's your recommendation for our family and friends and folks we know who just won't take the vaccine for whatever reason? How do we broach that subject? Is there any way to solve, if that's the word, that problem?
It's a touchy subject, partly because of the individuals not wanting to be vaccinated. My approach typically has been, and I think it's a good one, is I tend to tell everyone getting vaccinated is not just about you protecting yourself. It's also about protecting those you care about. So as each person gets vaccinated, there's one less host that the organism can attack. And I think it's important for us to understand that the vaccines have been developed to stimulate our immune system to make cells against the organism, so that in the event we come in contact with this organism, there's a way for us to fight it. And we've already seen that in this country in particular right now, that 98% of the hospitalizations in the US have been in those people who are unvaccinated. So the fewer people that there are that are unvaccinated, the less of a host. And I think it's important to remember, the world's never seen an organism this contagious. And so the more we as a globe attack this, the better off we're going to be.
What about booster shots? What's your recommendation on booster shots?
Well, I think people should get the booster shots, because what has come out from particularly the original study cases around the globe is that most of the vaccines, their efficacy or their ability to stimulate our immune system lasts about 6 months in most of the vaccine cases, 8 months in the Moderna. And with that, it means that the protection that we have wanes. And so as to give it a comparison, the typical flu vaccine in a good year tends to give us about 4 months of immune protection. So these vaccines are really good, but they wane. And because we've had so many variants since this has started, we continue to need something to protect us. And what the booster does is it gives us additional time of immune protection. And that's why the boosters will be beneficial. Again, another way to keep the organism at bay as best we can under the circumstances.
Dr. Kennedy, we're coming up to a holiday seasons now. How should we protect our family and friends apart from maybe the vaccine? Are there other things we can do?
Absolutely. Wearing masks, for sure. Hand hygienes, trying to avoid being in crowded settings. So, as always happens during the holiday seasons, people get together. And what you would hope is as many people as possible be vaccinated. That makes it harder for the organism to take hold. And even if it does, it ends up being a milder exposure and or infection. Washing hands as often as you think about it. And face masks clearly have made a difference. And probably one of the better examples that this has played is that in 2020, we did not have very much of a flu season. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that, one, people were wearing masks when they were out and about. Two, people were washing their hands frequently. And three, there was social distancing. So in an average year in the US, there's 40 million people who might get the flu and 30,000 or so deaths. And that was back in 2019. In 2020, the first year of the pandemic, there were less than 10,000 cases in the United States of flu. And there were less than 1,000 deaths. So we were so much better at protecting ourselves just by doing that. So as long as we vaccinate whenever possible, wear masks, washing hands, social distancing when appropriate.
Turning to the physical activity side of things, perhaps I can say a couple of words there. I think it's been almost a double-edged sword there a little bit. It's the big changes with COVID. Obviously, there's the tendency to exercise outdoors a bit more, but also there's been a big increase in people buying home equipment and also, using home exercise programs, whether via YouTube or Peloton or those type of copyrighted programs. And for one thing, thank the Lord that we're in a time when we can use these programs. Maybe 15, 20 years ago, people wouldn't have had that reference. So we've got all these programs you can do at home, and people have actually converted their garages to home exercise studios. And 3 months into the pandemic, it was very hard to buy home exercise equipment. The demand was so high. So I think that's great, and I would never like to knock that. But from a wellness perspective, the one thing I worry about that is that it tends to make people, again, very insular. People are exercising by themselves. We're missing that group interaction. And that doesn't mean you have to go into your local fitness centre and kumbaya and hug everybody. It's even just that interaction of saying hello to the person at the front desk, working with a personal trainer, or seeing people in your group exercise class or so forth. So there has been a tendency for people to become more self-reliant, which is great with exercise, but you've also lost a little bit of that factor.
I would like to push a little bit on that, because I think that one of the things that the virus is living on basically is our need for connections. That's what it's about. The more, because we are social humans, social beings, and we want both to be close and we want to hug and touch each other. That is actually shown to be beneficial for us. But of course, the virus coming and they are taking advantage of that. So it's a big challenge to, when we say social distancing is good, of course social distancing is good because we need to prevent the virus, but we also have to be smart about it. And as you say, in the fitness area, it has really put a dent into group activity. Do you have any ideas about how we can get over that and social safe ways of doing that?
Yeah, there are obviously online programs. People are actually doing that now, getting together in groups to go for group walks and things like that to encourage that. And you can see even programs like Peloton do, in a sense, try to create a community, even though it's a virtual community, if you will. They see the benefit of that. I think a very interesting perspective I learnt from one of the local group exercise instructors I've known at Orange Theory. And I think it's great in the community the way we've all come together and said, hey, listen, help people in restaurants and so forth who have been losing money, people who are, working these jobs that relies on custom and so forth. Well, I think we should extend that a little bit to think about people who work in fitness centres, your personal trainers, your group exercise instructors. They're not earning great money either. They might get a few clients and earn more than $8 to $12 an hour, but they're still surviving from week to week. So think about it from a community sense. But even as we emerge from it, I think you'll find that most of the fitness centres take pretty good precautions as far as social distancing and so forth. So if we could go back to our fitness centres, our community centres, and think about just ways to interact, I think that will be a big help in the way we frame discussions going forward.
So this is also a question to Dr. Kennedy as well. The way I'm thinking about this is, yes, we are trying to hit different targets here. And we are trying to not kind of stop the society in its working and even the way we are working together or interacting. Yet at the same time, we need to reduce the speed of transmission. In my understanding, the speed of transmission is really clearly linked to closeness between the number of people you're seeing at a specific time. So that's why they were talking about big groups. They have these big parties in Norway. There was one where there were 200 people, and we got a big spreading of the Omicron. Also because they had loud music and they were all together at the same time. So the multiplication factor was so big. Whereas if you're working together with one personal trainer, he or she is vaccinated, maybe that is so much less of a risk. It's a risk. There is a risk, but you can kind of judge these things. And as a society, we also need to think about these things. Dr. Cannon, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I would say that I agree with you. You're absolutely right. The more people you have in a cluster gathering, the greater the chance there's going to be an infection. It doesn't take much, but this goes back to where we're starting from. So the more people there are that are vaccinated, the more people there are that have understood just basic human hygiene, doing those simple things and avoiding it as best you can, because we're all going to get exposed. It's no different than whenever the flu season comes around. If you're out and about in a crowd, all you needed before was one person to sneeze. And if you were there long enough, you might take that virus with you. You might not get sick right then and there. COVID's a little bit different. You get exposed just by having normal conversation. You get exposed just by sitting across the table from someone who's just breathing. They may not be opening their mouth. The organism gets in the air and it's got legs and it's got teeth and it'll hang around. And again, because you might not get sick for 7 to 14 days, you won't know. And then you will then have exposed yourself, go back home to your family, your friends, and meet with them. So you're right that minimizing the clusters, and this is where we should expect cases to go up. So as they are opening up the concert venues, the theaters, and things of that nature, you're going to get more cases. You almost have to. What we've seen, though, is more people are vaccinated. The symptoms are much less. There are much less people ending up being hospitalized. So therefore, if the organism doesn't have somewhere where it can take hold and multiply and run amok, it turns to die out. That's what this is all about. And this is why we have to be aware and be cautious of our surroundings. And you want to minimize alcohol intake, because you get together with the family gathering, One glass goes up to cheer the celebration and happy to be out and about from being locked down. And before you know it, there's 4 more glasses of wine and 2 more glasses of shots and 2 more beers. And before you know it, all of the sort of common sense things about not yelling and screaming across the room. This is such an easy organism to spread. We have to use common sense. This isn't any different. This is about something that humans haven't been good at doing in the last several years. We really do need to be concerned about our fellow man. And you start with the people who are around us.
Dr. Kennedy, I think you're giving me a reason why Australia had some of the biggest lockdown procedures.
It's kind of funny. So on the other side, Norway, one of the first things they did was to make alcohol serving at restaurants illegal during a period, because they basically knew that alcohol is the big thing, make people speak louder, they scream, and they get much closer.
Yes.
Yep.
And especially if you add in music.
Oh, yeah. You add in music, the concerts. That's why the cases are going to go up. And we've already seen that just with the professional soccer season. We've seen it with the NBA. We've seen it with the NFL. We've seen it college football. We've already seen the cases are going to go back up. And that's amongst places and companies and organizations that have unlimited resources where they're literally testing their athletes every day. And the cases are still happening. Yet, people are not ending up in the hospital. The hospitals are not as overwhelmed. In all the countries around the world where the cases are going up and the hospitals are overwhelmed are because they were too quick to resume what the perception of normal is. And our normal has to change for a while until we have more control of what this virus is doing. Right now, the virus is leading the charge and we're following. We need to be on the other side of this.
Ketil, as an international economist who's worked around the world, what trends are you seeing from family and friends and colleagues related to COVID?
Well, I think this has been a shock to the system about the way we're working together, as well as, of course, our fiscal conditions. And it has had a really profound impact on the way we work and interact. It has pretty much thrown away all the manuals. And we have to start anew, and it's not over. I mean, in a way, we are still writing the manuals, and we're still figuring out how to deal with this. And I think it's like when you look at the bank and the fund, we are bound to be pretty much followers because we have all kind of rules that are linked to a legal structure, even as an international organization. But I think we shouldn't really fool ourselves. It's not like you can decide a date, we're all going back and it's going to be as before. I think we have discovered the advantage of technology in a quite dramatic way. Large productivity increases in some areas, but also quite negative impacts in other areas. And we do have to really go back and figure out how to work this in a better way. And I think we've seen some companies doing it well. We've seen some areas doing it well. And in a way, I think the fund and the bank would do these things as best as we can, because in reality, we're probably not going to invent anything. And I just would like to end with this thing is a threat not only to our physical condition, but also a threat to our mental condition. And you have seen the mental illness coming up. And this is why I'm kind of also pushing on the whole thing that the virus has taken advantage of a human need, which is human connectedness. We just have to figure out a way of being humanly connected in a safe way and taking the precautions that are smart. And we are so lucky that we have the vaccines that can help us in this endeavor. So I would stress Dr. Kennedy's message about vaccines. And it's not the first time there's been vaccine resistancy. We can go back. And it's not the first time we have had vaccine passports either. This goes back all the way back to the time of the pest. So you see the struggle there we as humankind have been dealing with this. and we also should learn from it.
I have a question for the panel. What trends and changes do you each think that we will see for 2022, for COVID and the pandemic, for global health, fitness, and the world economy? Dr. K, would you like to start?
Sure. One of the things that definitely, and I've seen it most of this year, is that the mental health aspect of depression, anxiety, loneliness, separation has increased threefold. I think that we didn't take into account the isolation that the pandemic has created. And what has happened is lots of people, and this goes back to what Ketil said about the human connectedness, and that when you're connected with people, and this is what being in the workspace did differently or doing it, is that you would go to work, and if you had issues, particularly if you were single and you didn't have someone at home, you might vent your concerns to a colleague. You might talk to a good friend. Now we see that people are having a lot of trouble, and I see this in practice, coping with it, because they're now tired, because they've been sort of locked down, and now just the ability to get out and feel part of something, part of the human race again, is actually important. So going forward, I think that we're learning that mental health is really important, and that a lot of people live their lives not dealing with their own mental health. And this pandemic has forced people to take an inward look, and some people weren't prepared for what they saw.
Mike, what about yourself?
Yeah, on the fitness side of things, looking at fitness centers, whether they be corporate or commercial or wherever, I think they're going to be expanding their services a little bit to look at more outdoor activities, incorporating somehow thinking beyond the four walls of a fitness center. And that will include wellness services too. They're starting to realise that it's more than just about your own health and fitness and how far you can walk and run and jump and so forth. It's about your connectedness, your overall mental health and so forth. And I guess here in certain parts of America and in some of the countries like Australia as well, we've got to get used to working out in the cold. Countries in Norway where Ketil, they've been doing it for years. We just have to adapt to that and learn that there is the benefits from going for a walk. It's not all bound inside your garage fitness centre or your indoor Zoom class, etc. It's expanding our boundaries a little bit to think about those things.
You're just cold people, you know. You're just
right.
Cold people.
Yeah.
And as long as you don't give us a beer or alcohol, you know, we are cold.
That's where we're walking to, Ketil. We're all walking to go down to the pub.
No, so I'm quite pessimistic when it comes to the pandemic. I think Dr. Kennedy can correct me if I'm wrong, but we'll see likely more mutations. It's pure genetics. The genes don't really have any evil intent, but the ones that are the most infectious are the ones that survive. So from the same viewpoint, they're not the ones that are actually killing us very fast won't be the ones that win in the pool. So together with vaccines and medication, we're likely to see less of an impact over time of this pandemic. So this is good news. But we also have to learn really to live with it. So this is what we're going to see in 2022. We're going to see some kind of, in quotation mark, normalization of this. And we need to work on all levels, and in particular on vaccines. I think in the end, on the terms of, that works as well for companies and the way we are working together. We will have to really find ways of allowing people to work more in different places, find way of meeting, and find way of working out together, maybe outside and in some cases inside. But again, doing everything that's necessary, including maybe testing and vaccines, hygiene, etc.
Another question for all of you. Over the course of the pandemic, what are the biggest lessons you've learned from your experiences? Is there a single most important lesson that you've gained from this experience? Dr. K?
I've actually been pleasantly surprised by the resiliency of humans, because this thing took people by surprise, although I don't think it should have. And what I've seen is that even with the resistance that was there, and it wasn't a lot, but it was enough noise that people fought doing the common sense thing. And now that this has sort of lasted and it has not disappeared, I'm glad to see that people as a whole are turning the corner and making efforts. I tend to agree with Ketil, though I'm pessimistic, because every time we start to win a battle, we sometimes are very quick to forget where we've fallen and how far down, and we tend to repeat the same misery all over again. And I hope that doesn't happen.
Well, I'm going to be a little different to these two negative Nellies here. I think, like everything else, we'll pull out of it, and we'll pull out of it well. It's going to take some ups and downs. But in answer to your question, Dave, I think the biggest thing I've learned is the importance of connectedness between individuals and between us as just human beings. I guess I took that for granted, being a fairly gregarious fellow in a position where we saw lots of members each day. You just take that sort of thing for granted. But you don't realise how important it is and how people can get very lonely, and the epidemic of loneliness that can happen in, this country or any other country for that matter. So that's what I've learned from it. But I know there's going to be some ups and downs, but I think we'll come out of it.
Yeah, I would agree, both of you, and I think actually both of you are quite optimistic. I think the resilience of humankind has been showing itself to be much, much stronger than there was a movie. I don't remember the name of that movie. There was a movie about a very similar pandemic that actually, and the way that portrayed, it also started about the same place. It didn't affect people in the same way. It was not only the old, this has a more of an age bias. It was very mortal. But actually there you saw people really fighting in the street and the society breaking down. This has not happened. This has been the exception. Very few places, it's really the exception. The norm has been that people have been pulling together. And I think that is really what we should see. There's been some demonstrations in Europe, etc., but it's really not the norm. And I think that is been a good thing. Then it also have shown us actually a few things that we have learned. The fact that we have to be home, we learned us to use technology better. It's a simple thing that I had thought that I would like to mention as well, is that people have discovered maybe a simple thing, and the importance of going and taking a walk, especially in the United States. It's not something that's used, but people you see outside, they meet each other. You have seen bands in the street. Maybe we can keep some of that after this is all over. Some of this reality, using the public space to meet instead of just in homes and in bars and pubs.
Agreed.
It's always important to leave with an optimistic note or tone. I greatly appreciate the opportunity for this conversation and for people to have the ability to learn from each of you. I'd like to thank you as listeners for joining us for the premiere episode of Wellness Musketeers. Tune in for upcoming episodes to learn from global health leaders, trend-setting authors, and gain the tools to improve your life and live a more balanced quality of life. Share this recording with your family, friends, and colleagues. Please let us know what you'd like to learn to help you live your best life. Send your ideas for future episodes to davidmliss@gmail.com. Thank you.